Welcome to the Engineering Influence Podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And at the time of recording this podcast, we're gearing up for our 58th Annual Engineering Excellence Awards. And today we want to focus on one of the projects that is going to be awarded an honor award at that event in May. And that is from Michael Baker International out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we're talking about the Three Sisters Bridges. Now, if you are familiar with or have ever watched a Pittsburgh Steelers game or you know of Pittsburgh, you know it is a city of bridges. And there are three bridges that are really historic because they are the only bridges of identical side-by-side crossings in the world, essentially identical, but different in many different ways. We're talking about first the Roberto Clemente Bridge, the 6th Street Bridge, the Andy Warhol Bridge, which is the 7th Street Bridge, and the Rachel Carson 9th Street Bridge. And they all cross the Allegheny River, and they are really one of the biggest landmarks in the city. But they've been around for a while, since the early 1920s, and the weather and the environment takes its toll, especially in Pittsburgh. And they need to be rehabilitated. Michael Baker International was brought in to do that project, and their work has earned them an honor award. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by Aaron Colorito. He is the technical manager bridges for Michael Baker International. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us to talk about the project.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So this is something else because I mean, really, I'm a Pennsylvanian myself, so from the other side of the state, but everybody knows Pittsburgh, right? And you can't not know these bridges. So they are just really unique to the city. I mean, how was it to get really to work on such a identifiable landmark for a city?
It's really something because I graduated college. I had got a master's degree in 2011 in Cleveland, and I spent a couple of years working for a small consultant there. And I had interned with Michael Baker before and kind of worked on just when Michael Baker got in the contract and just kind of dabbled in it. But I mean, you can't walk 2 steps anywhere in the city without either being able to see them or, they're on a billboard, they're on someone's logo, they're on, um, the jumbotrons at the Penguins and the Pirates games. You really can't go far without seeing some image of these bridges somewhere. So I've worked on them at this point for basically my entire career, and it's really been something.
Yeah, I mean, looking at just the fact that they're built in the 1920s first, and they've been servicing an entire population in the city. There's a lot there, historical significance, and just how do you approach the project. What are some of the challenges that the firm faced when rehabbing these bridges? They're three separate bridges designed same time, but they're all different in their own special way.
Yeah, it's funny because they are, we call them the Three Sisters. They're identical for all intents and purposes. They are. This type of bridge had only ever been done once before. And there was a crossing over, I think it was the Rhine River in Cologne, Germany. It was built in 1915-ish. And if you look at pictures of it, I mean, the portal looks the same with the kind of windows in it. It's almost, if they had copy paste back then, it was almost copy paste. So they, designed and built the 7th Street Bridge was kind of the prototype. That one was done first. And then the 6th and 9th Street bridges, the ones that are on either side, are slightly different from 7th Street. 7th is slightly narrower and slightly longer. But 6th and 9th were actually produced from the same set of shop drawings. Actually, 6th Street Bridge is written nicely in the title block, and then handwritten above it is and 9th Street Bridge on top of it. But I mean, they're really cool bridges, designed and built by the American Bridge Company, or not designed, I should say, built by the American Bridge Company. They were designed by Allegheny County. I'm actually from Ambridge, the company town of
There you
American
go.
Bridge. My grandfather was a drafter for them for many
Oh
years.
wow! So you actually this is multi-generational for you. I mean, this goes back
I've
to
got them in
its
my blood a
inception.
little bit.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, and they've they're not the first bridges at these sites. 6th Street Bridge is actually the fourth or I should say, the Clemente Bridge is actually the fourth bridge there. It replaced a suspension bridge that John Roebling had designed, one of his first ones, and it kind of gave them the first inkling that a traditional suspension bridge wasn't going to work, because the soils in that part of the town are not great. So they built it, and actually the anchor just started slipping. So they would add more weight to it and just kind of hope and pray that it would be all right. Um, so about, I want to say I think it was around 1918, 1914, somewhere around after World War One. So 1819. There's actually a mandate from the Department of War, what it was called back then, that all cities that had navigable rivers, they wanted all the river crossings had to be raised so you could get a warship under it. And right now, back then and right now, 6th, 7th, and 9th Street are the lowest crossings on the Allegheny, and the city was mandated to raise them. So they put forth a whole bunch of different concepts, lift bridges, suspension bridges, truss bridges, but you're so confined in that area, going into town, and then especially on the other side of the river, what's now the North Shore. That was a different city at that time too. That was Allegheny City, so it was completely different set of folks that you had to work with. So they had an art commission back in that rejected all of the types that they put forth. So about that time was when probably the county got word of that self-anchored suspension bridge that had been built in Germany, and there was a paper written about it. They looked at it, said, "All right, let's give this a shot." The art commission accepted it, so they went ahead and designed and built all three of them.
Oh, man, looking back at some of the, I mean, did you go back into some of the original designs and some of the early drafts on that bridge back from the 1910 1900s?
There were a couple of images, like kind of drawings, renderings, but nothing that was design wise. We were actually really lucky. The county still had the original design calcs for the bridges, and it was really funny because it's about this thick. It's maybe 100 pages, and I feel like today one of my one of my slim calc books is maybe like 16,000 pages or something like that.
Like,
But yeah, and they designed and built them with the design drawings were about 30 sheets a piece. The shop drawings were about 90 to 100.
yeah.
It took us 150 to rehabilitate them.
Looking, I mean, applying a lot of modern, I mean, how did you apply those modern techniques, the engineering practices with the bridges, keeping that structural integrity, keeping that historic integrity in place, but applying some more of the modern engineering practices?
So it started out with, reviewing those original calcs, and we
Hmm.
found that they had a couple of errors even back then. So when we did that, and then all through the years, the bridges had never been analyzed in 3D,
Hmm.
not once. So we said, well, we're going to try doing it in 3D,
Yeah.
3D fine element, just to see kind of, we were interested, especially because, these bridges are loved so much that we will close them down to traffic
Yeah.
and put festivals, parties. There's a boxing ring on one,
Hmm.
the Picklesburgh Festival, all kinds of different things that were on them. So what we were really interested in was seeing how, if you model crowds of pedestrians
Mm.
on it, how does the bridge react? Kind of, does it want to torque? Does it want to twist? What happens there?
Hmm.
So that was kind of the first shot. And then once we started really digging deep into repairs and designing, the repairs and their
Hmm.
connections, we started to realize that a lot of places, um, we were actually pushed at the very beginning to use rivets, new rivets in the construction, and just based on their nature. And we found in a lot of places that, they wouldn't, you know even if you were able to drive a new rivet using like an old rivet spec like A502 from ASTM, they wouldn't work either. There's just modern lows are just too heavy. So at the time, at least I thought, maybe because I had a lot of hopes and dreams and sparkle left in my eyes back when we started, that um, I would just provide that information and then everyone would be satisfied. And it was just the beginning. Um, because in this, there's multiple stakeholders from just from the city and the county themselves. There's PennDOT, there's the Coast Guard, there's all the people that live and work there. PNC Park is about 18 feet from the end of the Clemente Bridge. Yeah. So, and then the big issue that we ran into was with the with SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, and the Pittsburgh Historic Museum Commission. They were wanted to really know that there was no way that we could use rivets. So actually, I have this thing that I've dragged around the country with me for show and tell. Um, was to show, well, to explain to people really like, is this an option? So I had knocked something together out of wood in my garage at one point and got a chance to make it out of steel because I was like, it should be made out of steel. But to say, okay, if I take this is a rivet from one of the Three Sisters bridges, and you put it next to an A325 bolt, I mean, you could tell they're different. So one of these, possible solutions that someone had thrown out was, is there some way we could take like a plastic cap or something to, snap on or to emulate it? And I said, okay, well, let me think about that. And about $1 later and a couple of, half hour at Hobby Lobby, and I said, okay, well, that's how big your cap would need to be just to cover the head end. And that's not even counting the nut end, which could have any amount of stick out. So they were pretty satisfied that that wasn't a good idea. So, I threw out there, we have, there's an alternate to hex-headed bolts. There's the F1852 tension control bolts that have, it's still a nut on one end, but you have this advantage of having the domed, button head on the other. And, just by happenstance, their head, the proportions of the head when you're looking at it and you're just walking by, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, especially once you get, a real industrial 3-coat paint system on there, you can't tell to just a layperson. So we made an effort. We said, would this be an acceptable solution if we were to, make sure that we orient the heads, to where people would see them the most? And that was an acceptable solution to everyone. So we actually had some language in the drawings and in the specifications to say, Mr. Contractor, you must use these bolts everywhere you can. There's a couple places here and there where you can't get them domestic, or we might have needed, there's a repair where we needed about 20 of them of a very specific size. And they said, well, we could either get them from Japan or we can order a cask of 6,000. That's the minimum order for these. So I said, I think it will be okay if we used hex-headed bolts here in that situation.
That compromises compromises a beautiful thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Especially
I
when it
think
works your way.
exactly. But I think that really underscores the amount of care that goes into the restoration work on these cherished pieces of infrastructure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, there are going to be interest groups that, of course, will focus specifically on the size, diameter of a bolt. Without question, right? This is what
Oh
they
yeah.
do.
Yep.
But the general public is going to see it and go, well, it looks the same.
Mm-hmm.
But the care and detail that you went home, you created a mock-up out of wood in your own garage to demonstrate, and then to bring up options, and I think there are a lot of people out there who are like, okay, they rehab the bridges and it looks great, and it's it's going to be safer, but they don't realize exactly how detailed these projects go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And it's difficult, especially when you get questions from, our friends, family, what's going on? How do you do that? And I said, well, do you have an hour? Because that's
yeah,
kind of what I need to
yeah,
really drill down and explain it to you. They said, could you give it to me in 25 seconds? Well, we're fixing it. There you go.
yeah. Well, when you mentioned the 3D modeling and the fact that you were able to kind of do the dynamics of crowds on the bridge or different traffic patterns on the bridge and use cases, not just travel with vehicles.
Mhm.
I mean, having that, I mean, that's going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's going to help in the future. It really is that digital modeling that's going to help define how these bridges can use tolerances and the like. So it really is creating an entire new chapter for these bridges that have been around for over a century. That now you have a better, because everything before was, yeah, we'll do a festival on the bridge, it should be fine. It's been standing up since 1920, so it's nothing's going to happen. But now you actually have
Yeah.
detail and say, here are the tolerances of this bridge.
Yeah. Now the county now can, because, it's the even more fun thing about it, I should say, is, the county owns the bridge. The city of Pittsburgh owns the streets that lead up to it. The Coast Guard and the um, deals with the river. And then you have PennDOT who owns the street there, the road that runs underneath it. So there's a lot of coordination that has to go between all these players when, for example, they want to close one of the bridges. Except for a pirate game where an event. If they do it during the day or something, that's pretty common. And the great thing about these bridges, especially with doing the rehabs, was we could close them down all the way because, oh, what's the detour? Just go to the next bridge over and then go to the next bridge after that if there's a problem over there. So that was, pretty unique part of it was still having to define a detour, but and not being able to put like on the plans a picture of me just pointing to the distance where there's a bridge a couple of feet away
Exactly.
that you could go to.
How did you kind of roll in demands for sustainability into the bridge rehab project? I mean, it's you have to look at the structural side of things, but then also there's always a push for making sure that there is a sustainability function here going into
Mhm.
it.
So probably one of the biggest things that I would say is the great thing about the bridges is they're made out of steel. And that's a little bit of preference on my part. I'm very much a steel guy, but especially modern steels, they're essentially 100% recycled. Things that are done used in an electric arc furnace, anywhere between 90 to 100% recycled. So that was a great place to start when we start thinking about sustainability. Um, Now you have to go the opposite end that we have to deal with concrete. Concrete's a pretty big CO2 producer, but as of this moment, we don't have, I would say, a lot of attractive alternatives to that. So we're kind of trying to play that balance of, how do how do we play with that to use the materials in a justified way. Um, and then one of the big things I think that we did that kind of improved quality around the bridges was we cleaned all the masonry, all the masonry substructures. They're sandstone, so they're basically um, a color anywhere from. Uh, this is a pretty typical color. Actually, it's pretty close. Like a sandstone, kind of light brown, a little bit of orange kind of color. But they've been essentially gray and black for decades. You know, our sooty past. So we tried in our first contract with 7th Street, we had to input an item in the contract to say, hey, we're going to clean this masonry and we're going to do all these bridges one at a time. They're going to look great. We're going to get all that contamination and pollutants off of there. And then everything that we had put in there is like all these chemicals didn't work. So we had some options that we could try. The contractor that was working on the bridge at the time even brought out someone that had a laser that would actually burn the
Oh
stuff
wow!
off of
So you're burning off the layer of
the
sandstone.
masonry. So
Yeah.
we didn't like it for that reason that we could potentially damage a stone. It didn't get to the color that we thought it was. It kind of just it went from black to kind of like a darker gray, like a lighter gray. And then it was wildly expensive and it was slow. It took, an hour to clean maybe a couple of square feet. And we had over 9,700 square yards of material total for all three bridges to clean. So we went back to the drawing board, tried it again with the 6th Street contract because we were already going to go back and touch all three bridges. and we came up with another list of different things to try. Contractor went out, none of those worked. So they actually had a masonry specialty subcontractor on the contract, and they brought up the idea of doing abrasive blasting. So with a very gentle, it was glass beads mixed with water.
Oh, okay. So like a silico, I was thinking silico, or it's just like glass beads and water. Okay.
So they did try a couple of things. They tried black beauty. They tried a couple of different grades of sand, but those beads ended up being a pretty good blend of aggressiveness, but they didn't remove the texture from the stones, which was actually really a really important thing that we had to keep under control, because below the deck level, all the masonry is just, it's like rough cut stone. It's nicely dressed, but it's a rough face. When you get from deck level up, all that stone is hand textured. It has a stippled finish on it that was done with like a bush hammer. It was physically a mason that would stand there and do that. So we couldn't lose that. So after the contractor got a couple of test patches, they were able to really dial their procedure in, and then all of that stuff they were able to collect, either with turbidity curtains or sandbags and pumping. So they were able to collect all that waste, which, luckily had no added chemicals, but we don't
Yeah.
know what was. It's mostly carbon, probably just from soot.
Yeah, but you never know, right? And that's the you can't really. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So so it was all able to be collected, stored, shipped, disposed of properly. So I would say those are probably um, our two big pushes towards
Yeah.
sustainability on those bridges.
Those are not small pushes on sustainability. So I mean that I mean that, but that makes everybody happy, right? So PennDOT's happy. DEP, I'm sure, is happy because
Hmm.
they have to figure out about what's going to be going into the Allegheny. But then it brings up the question of like just the other stakeholder groups, the community groups. You mentioned everybody who was involved here.
Hmm.
I mean, how did you guys work with those groups just to keep them kind of happy, informed, and on board with the project, especially, the communities that are directly impacted by the bridges right around, each of the bridges because, Pittsburgh it's a big city, but it's a fairly compact city. So these bridges
Hmm.
do have a direct impact on the people living there. What was the community response to the project?
It the initial response was happiness mixed with a little bit of dread. I think. Um, I think the initial response, I think people thought we were going to close all three bridges at the same time, which was never going to be the plan. Just kind of doing them one at a time. But at the same time, the last time I counted, um, trying to actually put together an award submission, was I lost count at 20 or 25 different stakeholders. Not only just residents that live, there's an apartment community like right at the end of the Ninth Street Bridge. You've got the people that live downtown on the south end of the bridges, and then there's a lot of people that work right at the north end of the bridges. Notwithstanding PNC Park, that's right there. So the biggest thing, and you said it when you were starting the question, was just communication. Is we figured we had a sub consultant with us that dealt specifically with communication, press releases, and then working with um, Allegheny County Department of Public Works has their own press officer, that we spent a lot of time going back and forth with him, to make sure that if something was going to change, if something needed to be done at night, people were aware of it. So, like for example, the enhanced lighting system that was installed on the bridges, um, that has been a really nice success. We had to do some work at night because, one, if the contractor, the electrical subcontractor, was working on a barge on a man lift under the on the river, so you have to work at a time where there's not a lot of river traffic. So naturally, that's at night. And then also because they had a very limited amount of time that they could be in the river, essentially obstructing navigation, they wanted to make sure that when they installed these lights, that they would look the way the county wanted to look, which meant doing it at night. So that enabled them to kind of set the light, everyone look at it, agree this is what we want, And then the electricians were able to build jigs that they could go, and when they went to the next location, just set a jig, set the fixture, and they knew that it would be good. But then, of course, you've got a man lift that might be moving. You've got the barges. So informing people that, hey, we're going to be working at night. You're going to see lights. It's going to be a little bit noisier, but we're doing our best to um, limit the noise. Every project had a noise monitoring item, within it. So they had to constantly monitor, construction site noise. They weren't allowed to work certain hours. I'd say 99% of the time, overnight, weekends, to try to to try to intrude in people's lives as little as possible. And that really came to a head when we finished the Clemente Bridge, the 6th Street Bridge, because none of the bridges had a large area to work around. The contractors are working on top of each other. You've got material stacked on the bridge itself. 6th Street Bridge ends at it becomes Federal Street on the north side. That's where the Pirates will have, family days, the inflatables and bounce houses and food trucks and all kind of stuff. So making sure that we would, interfere with that as little as possible
Mm-hmm.
was a real challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. From a it's wrapping it up. It's just one of those projects that is going to have, with the rehabilitation. I guess first off, I mean, with the rehabilitation being done now, I mean, how many years does this add on to the lifespan of the bridges? Like, when is the next projected rehab going to have to happen after this project?
So our goal was 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Is we kind of established that as a minimum.
Yeah.
In all likelihood, you may need to come and do some deck work.
Mm-hmm.
Probably maybe 25 to 30 years. The bridges will need painted
Yeah.
in about 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, modern paints. That's pretty good
Yeah. So, I mean,
compared to what
really,
was there.
I mean, essentially, you're looking at something that you worked on that is going to stand for at least 50 years until the next project's going to happen. Um, I mean, you looking back, I mean, you had members, like you said, members of your family that were essentially drafting with the company that actually built the original bridges. I wasn't mean to you, because we always like to talk, and people watching this and trying to get them engaged and interested in engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And the next generation, of course. But from a personal standpoint, professional standpoint, I mean, what does it mean to you to be able to work on a project like this that has such an impact and historical, and then also be able to leave your mark on something which is such a loved piece of infrastructure in a city?
I mean, honor is what comes to mind, really, for me. And my wife will be the first one to tell you that I'm a huge nerd when it comes to bridges. Can't go anywhere without saying, "Oh, I don't like the way that is." And she goes, "It's
Yeah.
standing. It's fine. Leave it be." But so much, this project and these bridges have been such a huge part of my life over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Before we were talking before that I have 3 children, 6, 4, and 2. One of them was born during each and every one of these projects.
Yeah.
So, I make the joke. I tell people, my 3 boys, and they'll say, "Are they named after the bridges?" "Oh yeah, my boys, Andy, Roberto, and Rachel are very near and dear to me."
I guess that was not the pun intended. I guess bridge too far for your wife, if you wanted to do the naming, right?
I knew better.
Yeah.
I knew better than to push that.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. I mean, congratulations again. I mean, this is the kind of project that fits right into the awards program. Looking forward to hopefully you're coming down for the program
I will
in
be.
May. Wonderful, so I get to see you in person. But for anybody out there, I mean, we're looking at a great awards program. Of course, Three Sisters Bridges, one of many projects being awarded, but wanted to get special recognition to Michael Baker International for the work that they did on the project. And just next time you find yourself in Pittsburgh, inevitably you'll probably find yourself on one of these bridges. And when you do, remember the people who actually made that possible to keep it standing for another 50 years in good standing, and the history that went into it. So, Aaron, really appreciate you taking time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Again, we have the Engineering Excellence Awards coming up in May at Washington D.C. and can't wait to just celebrate that and so many other projects. So again, this has been Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, and we will see you next time.